I think we're about ready to start. So, good evening. I want to introduce myself first and welcome to Ohel's Partners in Resilience. And my name is Harriet Blank. I'm the Director of Geriatrics at Ohel Children's Home and Family Services and the Director of the Lifetime Care Foundation. And tonight I'll be speaking with Dr. Norman Blumenthal. And really, we're going to be talking about some of the ambiguities of what's going on. How do we start emerging? How do we start dealing with our mixed messages? My focus, since I said I'm the Director of Geriatrics, is going to be, we're going to be starting with the older adults. How do you deal with older adults? How do you deal with visiting older adults? How do you deal with what they want you to do about visiting them and some of the confusions that we're having? And Norman is going to speak more about children, teenagers, adults, and again, how are we getting out of here? There is the, I'm pointing so you know, the chat button, so that we would love to, for your questions. We do have something prepared, both of us, but again, we'd like to be able to answer some of your questions. Some of them we might see while we're speaking, but some of it we'd like to leave time at the end for questions or things that you might want to think about. So without further ado, let's get started. And to say, like, we all don't know what to do as we are trying to decide, how do we go back to work? How do we go back to school? What is safe? How should we go to the store? What does a store mean? Can we go to the supermarket but not the nail salon? Or maybe we can go to the nail salon, but maybe we shouldn't really go to the mall. So we're trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure out, can we see friends? Can we see family? How many friends? What kind of family do we have? What is family? Which I think when I was thinking about this talk tonight, I think a lot of what I was thinking about is, and we've heard this throughout the years, what does family mean? What does it mean to be family? And, many places and many people say family now has new definitions and new names and new thoughts. So in a way, here it is the same idea. What does it mean when we say we're only seeing family? And it just becomes so confusing in this time of new normals to know what is it that we should do. So, like I said, my focus will be older adults. My focus will be about, do we visit them? How are we going to spend time with them? And also, I want to also talk about, how do we handle all the conflicting and mixed messages, not just from other family members or from the media or from television, but even from the older adults themselves. Why don't you come to see me? Don't come to see me. Come to see me more frequently. I thought you were going to come this day. All of you come. So again, I'm going to say that all these mixed messages are coming from so many places that sometimes we feel like, wait a second, we don't know which way to look first. So I'm going to bring that up too. So when we think about, and I speak from my own experience with my mother-in-law, where she's just said, you know what, I just had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. It's been since March. I feel like it's that old movie. I just can't take it anymore. And I think to myself, even for myself, what did I say? What did I want? I wanted to be able to go into a restaurant, not so much to eat. I could have done takeout throughout this time, but my kids laugh when I said, I just want to go to a restaurant, sit down at a table, and have someone pour me not only one glass of water, but a second glass of water. Because what does that mean? It meant I sat down long enough to actually drink a second glass of water. And think about, what does that mean, that this is what I'm looking forward to? But really what it's saying is we want to get back to a more normal time. We've just, like I said, had enough. But we say that and then we get afraid. Should we really say we've had enough? Should we really go out there? Are we ready to, take off those masks, go meet people, have Shabbos company again, go to shul, go to work, visiting families? We don't really know. So even though we've had a lot of information, I want to just start out with one statistic, which I'm not here to tell you, I just want to make one disclaimer, what you should or shouldn't do. We could talk a little bit more about how we tease out the different issues, but one statistic that I am going to quote from the CDC, I don't always play with statistics because we can always make numbers do whatever it is we want them to do. But one of the statistics are 8 out of 10 deaths due to corona or COVID-19 are people over 65. So when you hear that, it's a little, oh, that's a quite high number. And from a point of view of the older adults and for people, that growing number of older adults, and the truth is, the most older people, the 85 plus, are the people who are even the most vulnerable. When I give talks about older adults, I do divide them into the young old, the old old, and the middle old. So the old old, which is so fastly growing, are those 85 plus. Somebody's on, should up, should the oldest population really are those most vulnerable for death or possibly for a very long-term rehab potentials. Now, again, I'm not sitting here to have a whole discussion, young, old, who's more deserving. But as we look at families and families spanning the lifespan, it is something that I think we need to be cognizant of. And in my next part, where we're going to talk about when you decide whether you're the older adult or you're involved with grandparents or older parents or aunts or uncles or anybody, we really, as we're now doing this for, it's hard to believe, 4.5 months, it's time to start evaluating what are the risks of seeing your family members or friends who are older. And I'm going to just say family members just for the sake of making it easier to speak now. What are the risks versus what are the rewards? What are the rewards when you go to see somebody who is older, someone who's been home or who isn't living with you? Because there is a difference. I mean, we heard about this when Corona first came out, that if you had grandparents or you had older adults living with you when you were still going out, maybe they went to their basement. Maybe they went to your basement if you were living together. They were in their room. I had this vision of people, with who were in self-quarantine before we even knew what self-quarantine would mean, and they would be extra quarantined. And we're not sure, we weren't really sure, and I still think we're not really sure how to handle this. But one thing we're going to talk about, as it's 4.5 months, is to think that loneliness is a predictor of physical decline. And I'm going to say that again because that is one of the most important things for us to think about. Loneliness is a predictor of physical decline. So many of the older adults, and I can say that during this time period at Ohel, we have many older adult programs, whether it be Holocaust survivors, non-Holocaust survivors. We have programs where we see people who are depressed and anxious. We have certain kinds of classes, but we have made between 2,000 to 3,000 calls. We're actually, we are always impressed with our older adults who have really been able to engage in the therapeutic process over the telephone, because not everybody has the computers or the Zooms or the ability to learn. But that's a whole nother topic about how we teach them. But that's not for tonight, except for a little piece at the end. But this loneliness factor, people want to hear people. And we even talk about this where we say that, in the olden days, they said someone who lived alone used to call up just to hear what time it was, because they would call to say, I'm setting my clock, or what's the weather, because they wanted to hear another human voice if they lived alone. So just imagine an older adult who's living alone, whether it be, they're not married anymore, they're a widow or widower, they're divorced, their families live far away, they're home alone with no one to physically speak to for 4.5 months. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling, but that kind of loneliness, and I think that there's actually going to probably be epidemiological studies post-corona about the acceleration of aging, physical aging, due to these 4.5 months of isolation that so many families have done, and have done correctly, because they don't want someone, again, that's the mixed message. You don't want to hurt your family member, and at the same time, the cure is what's helping to hurt them. So again, that's where the tension lies. But now that it's 4.5 months, we're saying it might be time to evaluate, like I said, the risks versus the rewards. And we talk about how will we help the person who's living home alone, or maybe just a couple living together. They can't really, and you think about it, you can't go out, Your food is delivered to you. It's even delivered at your door. And sometimes, they ring the bell, walk away, and wave to you as they're halfway down the walkway. And we're trying to help people have a routine. But again, the point becomes for that older person, how much TV, radio, computers can we actually listen to? We know as much as we love Zoom, we're also tired of Zoom. What? Another Zoom meeting, another way of seeing people. Again, there are benefits, but still, for most of us, we kind of miss some of that human touch, that ability to kind of read some of the body language and the talk that we can have. So we try to be creative, and we've come up with creative ways to visit. And at the end, when we talk about visiting older adults, we're going to talk about, again, reminding some of those creative ways. Because even as we evaluate the risks of seeing an older adult, and even if it's something we decide to do, I think I can say with clarity, we're not going back to the old way right now. We're not going to be all going in and spending hours and having the whole large family go and see Bubby and Zadie, Safti and Saba. We're going to be doing this with a lot more thinking and a lot more planning. So with that, I'm going to talk about what are the things you should be evaluating. So the first thing is a reality check for you. Let's say you, the younger family member, however young you are, everyone think to themselves, we're all young. That's why when I talk about young, middle-aged, and old, all my older adults love to hear they're now middle-aged. So the reality check, what for you as a family, how safe, how self-quarantined were you really during these last 4 months? How much are you going out? Who do you see? Do you just go to the supermarket? Do you just go to your business? How many people do you really see? What is, the exponential numbers with who are you seeing who might have germs, who might be in contact with someone else? And when you visit, and again, you really have to do an honest answer to this. Do you always wear their mask when you're indoors with other people? Do you wear a mask when you're going outside and you're thinking that you might see people again that might be coming closer? And when you go out, do you go out for long visits with people? Because they've been saying that when you see people short time, you lessen the potential problems. So what is it? You need to make a check. Because if you say, I would like to see my grandmother, I would like to see my mother, are you preparing for that visit? Are you doing what they say, that 10 to 14 days of seeing less people in order to maybe safely feel comfortable? I mean, even the time you say it, you're like tripping over the words, to feel like you can really go and see somebody who is over 65, just to make that kind of a blanket statement. And again, we know that people can be very well over 65 and not well, but for the sake of today, we're making 65 that kind of a cutoff time. So are we also following the protocol, which is another mixed messages we all have. When you go outside, again, masks. Are you seeing more people outside? We talk about seeing friends and family outside. You see, I live in the 5 Towns area, and you just see people outside including me, on their front yard, in their backyard. You see people waving, talking. I've never seen so many people walking on the street as I have, not even on Shabbos, as during these last 4.5 months. So we have to think about it, because our fears also are that children who are maybe asymptomatic can also pass on the disease. And we worry about those children when they're going to go see people who are older. And then people say that they don't want their children to see older adults, their grandparents, because we're afraid. How do you explain to a 3-year-old you can't go over and kiss Bubby? How do you explain that you can't go sit on a lap? How do you explain about the hugs? So one thing that they've done studies saying is that young children, actually, if you explain to them, they do start to understand. And one way is to speak in the language for them that they understand. That going to visit Bubby, Zadie, whoever it is, your aunt, your uncle, you're like a superhero. You're like the Batman of today. You are going there to help make them feel good and to bring them your stories, play with them a little bit. But in order to be a really good superhero, there are rules we follow. Just like Superman couldn't be by Krypton. You just can't get that close. And that's a language that they said children understand. But it's also important to remember, don't sweat that someone's going to get corona, because your 3-year-old, when they were so excited to see their grandparent, ran away from you and went and hugged them. The question is, after they've done the hug, you gently, without being punitive, kind of let them get off the hug, unembrace them, help them to sit somewhere else. But again, it's also, don't do it in a punitive way, because we will have life after corona, I'm sure of it. And you don't want them to feel that hugging a grandparent is something that you get punished for. Showing affection is something that it's really such a balance that we get punished for. So help kids to think about being superheroes. The other thing I read is that a new way to hug people are leg hugs. Instead of giving someone a hug around, like this, hug their legs, go down and just give a little leg hug. Because the other thing is that one of the things, and this has been studied for many, many years, very much pre-corona, is that older adults miss touch. A widow or widower who's used to being in a loving relationship, after they've lost the spouse, one of the things that they miss is they miss having someone just to physically touch them, to hold them, to take a hand. We often are, people often do crave and need, again, that physical touch, that feeling of being close. So leg hugs might be the new way of hugging people, at least for the next few months. And if you've decided that you do want to visit with a family member, we need to plan. Even the idea of food. For us people that are Jews that love to have people come over, we want to feed them, we want to think about having a meal. This is not the time for family style eating. You see this at weddings, at simplest. Everything is pre-plated, put in little papers. And I think that one of the things I think about when I see the idea of the pre-plating or planning what you're going to eat in advance is it brings us back to, why are we getting together? We like to eat maybe, but we also want to feel connected. The idea of a visit, the idea of breaking bread, of sharing food, is because we want to be connecting with people. But we're going to have to think that the connection is the main part, not just the eating. And because we don't want to pass plates, we want to lessen physical contact as much as possible and still remain connected. And often a visit like this at the end is going to be very exhausting because of the amount of plans. One of the things that this whole time has done is it's taken away from spontaneity. You can't just say, come on by, come on over. You really do have to plan for it and think about what will happen. And when we talk about visits, let's say you're from a large family, the suggestion is pace your visits. If you have 10 grandchildren, all 10 of them should not go visiting the same day. Not only is it a little bit overwhelming for the older adult potentially, but also, 10 visits 10 people in a half an hour, when you could have, let's say, 5 visits with 2 grandchildren at each time. It's just, it's more exciting for the person. It's more, engaging. It's more, you expect to spend better quality of time. I mean, the visit itself is just a better visit because you want to think about what are you doing and what are you having to say. And even when you do the visit, coming up with creative things to talk about. Sometimes you say, when you ask someone, how are you doing? Same old, same old. I've been staying home for the last 4 months. People might not be sure what to say. So you need to kind of help come up with ideas. And that includes even continuing the Zoom ways, let's say we visit, or the Facebook or the FaceTime. So remember, when we're doing Zoom or we're doing this, what about Zoom teaching? And let the older adult be that tutor. Many of the parents have said they've had enough Zoom school. That's, for Norman and other people. Maybe letting the Bubby, the Zadie, or the great aunt or uncle be a tutor, a mentor in schooling, reading. Of course, story time. How many people say that their bedtime story is done with Bubby and Zadie every night? I have a friend, I told her I was going to mention it. She davens with her grandchildren every morning or every night, because some of them live so far away, so because of the time zone. It's different ways to stay connected. We could do it one-on-one, face-to-face, but we're going to be able to do this both things. So again, evaluate that risk. Say, do these kinds of visits count? I think that more people are thinking it might be time to have some visits. And when we have some of those visits, when we plan them, we also have to think about the person, but also where they live. Does the place where Bubby and Zadie allow visits? How do you have visits? Do you have to sign in? Because not only are you going into their home, but you might be, if they're in an apartment, an assisted living, if it's not just a single family house, they're also interacting with other people. Again, that's why I'm saying it's taking away from a lot of the spontaneity. So, again, when we're looking at this visit, it's something we're going to have to think about. And the other thing to think about is, what about the tensions between family members? There can be several siblings. I think it's time we see mommy and daddy now. Why are you not bringing the grandchildren? They're their nachas. They live for this. What are you doing? Just wear a mask and just go in. And then you have the other extreme. You're thinking that you might want to go in, and then you have another sibling that said, are you crazy? Haven't you been watching the news? Do you want to be the one who kills mommy and daddy? And then, and again, certain sibling issues that kind of come up to haunt us again as we're all watching or listening or reading the paper, where we really are not really 100% sure. And one thing I'm going to say is, I think we have to accept the fact that we really don't know 100% what is the best thing to do. What is the right way to go see Bubby and Zadie or any of our older friends and families? And we're going to hear from both sides. And by the way, what if we hear from the older person themselves? I want you to come. I need you to come. I lived through the Holocaust. I lived through so many things. You're telling me a little corona is going to be the end of me? Nah. And then you say, they kind of are correct. But then you say, maybe I shouldn't. And again, it's the voices back and forth. And then there's the other thing. Please, I'm afraid. Don't come near me. And you say, at this point, Ma, maybe you can. You've been in quarantine for 2 weeks. I've been in quarantine for 2 weeks. Nobody's seeing anybody. Maybe it's time. Maybe there is a way. And I think that part of it is, putting our toes out there. When we talk about it with water, sticking our toes into the water. That's why I think that, at least, thank God, it's warm out. Well, actually a little too hot now, but it's summertime. And this might be the way to get our toes wet in the water, as they say, by visiting people outdoors, by seeing people in a place that has been said to be more safe because we're outside. And again, perfectly logical to be sitting with 2 chairs outside having a visit. But I think that there are also going to be people that say, Corona, I don't care. It's all in God's hands. I want you. I think the important thing is really, I always call this is social work 101. I've been out of school a long time, but I can still say that. We need to learn to communicate. Communication is key. We need to be able to talk with our family members. We need to be able to talk with our older adults. We need to be able to say, these are the choices I'm making based on the facts and my feelings. It's okay to have facts and feelings. Not everything has to be so scientific. And then you have to say to yourself, can I live with my decision, but can I also live with the consequences? And I think that that's sometimes where people get stuck. What if, the what ifs? And you have to be able to say that, and especially during a pandemic, where to me everything is being magnified and examined, you have to say, where am I in this, and what can I live with, and what can I not, and can I live with myself? And again, you have to really include the older person in this. The older person might want something very different from you, and you need to be able to tease it out. You need to be able to say, Ma, I want to see you too, but at this point in time, I go to work, I have to do so many things. The kids are all over the place. I'm not comfortable with having you come for a Shabbos meal, but I'm really comfortable if we could walk during the week and maybe have an outdoor picnic dinner. We could visit this way. Maybe you shouldn't go to my house, but maybe we could talk about going to visit somebody else. And again, we struggle with this, especially for family members who the older person has an aide, and you're saying you're not going in, and the aide is coming in and out. So we have to figure out the choices, and we have to figure out how to listen to each other. And we have to figure out, how are we doing this as self-care? How are we taking care of the older person? What good things are we doing? What good things are we doing for ourselves? Especially, I just want to say, if you're a caregiver and you've been home with your older family member taking care, and you say, I can't go anywhere, I can't do anything, just a little plug. We do have an online support group at Ohel. This might be the time, if you haven't gone, to call at the end to say, wait a second, I want to join. Because being a caregiver is tough. And being a caregiver when you're stuck in the house for whatever reason is even harder. And just because I'm mindful of time and I want to make sure Norman has his time and question times, I just want to end on one part. And that is the idea that grandparents are babysitters for us. Many people lovingly, and I'm not saying this in an abusive fashion, grandparents help out with childcare. And basically every single thing I read said that unless the grandparents live with you, it's still considered risky for the older adult to become your child care people. Now, this might change come September, but I want you to know that it's still considered, if they can babysit outside, that's great. But I was reading in England, they're just starting to say maybe it's okay if there's just two families coming together. I think the bottom line is that we really don't know. But the idea of a babysitter means that we know that when you're babysitting, it's not a short visit. It's not even an hour visit. It's usually 4, 5, even up to 9 hours a day of visiting. And one of the things they are saying is that Corona is transmitted by being inside in the smaller spaces in a more concentrated time. The short visits or the short times are less likely to be difficult. So babysitting still seems to be off the table at this point. So the idea is that this isn't over yet. We're just giving ourselves things to think about. The idea of examining what is the risk, what is the reward, and the reward might be that someone who's been home for 3 months and not been able to communicate face-to-face with family members might actually not have feelings of depression, anxiety, stress, physical illness, insomnia. I mean, I could go through the litany of medical problems that people have been having, calling the doctor. There are people that go to the doctor just to have a person to see. Can you talk to me? So that there are rewards that overshadow the risk when you go to visit an older adult. So, I've done other talks on Kibud Av V'Em, and we know that the way we say the word Kibud, honoring your parent, it's hard. That's why it's Kabed, Kibud, from the Hebrew word of heavy. So what we know is that this conversation is not over. We're still going to try to figure out, who would have thought when we were thinking about how we're going to manage Pesach, as I read articles, we're already talking about how we're going to manage Rosh Hashanah. In my wildest dreams, I would never have thought this would be the conversation of today. And we have to be able to say, when we evaluate the risks and the rewards, we have to stand up for what we believe in. If we believe we have to see family members with masks, wear masks. If we believe we can't, we can't. We have to respect another family member who says, I can't go to visit mommy and daddy now because. We need to remember that the overall goal is to maintain ourselves as families. We are family, and families are about communication. Families are about love, and families are about care. So let's keep this dialogue going. Let's be able to say there are going to be new ways, there are going to be creative ways, and at the end of all this, we're going to come out even stronger. So with that, I turn this over to Norman, and any questions? I'm still listening. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you very much, Harriet. And can I introduce myself?
Thank you.
My name is Blumenthal. I'm the director of the Trauma, Bereavement, and Crisis Intervention for Ohel. I hope we can address some of the issues of the title, which is the inconsistent emergence from COVID restrictions. How do we handle the very different ways in which people are responding, even within our community? I also want to start by thanking Ohel for the opportunity to do this, our CEO, David Mendel, and our Presidium, Mel Zachter and Jay Kestenbaum, and my partner in crime, Sippy Ryder, who helped co-runs the trauma team with us. But first, let me just say from an onset, I want to clarify that neither Harriet and I are physicians or epidemiologists or infectious disease experts. We are not going to weigh in on what is the absolute right way, whether in terms of social distancing, wearing masks, having events with a lot of people, indoors, outdoors. I'll allow the experts to do that. What we're going to talk about is just the psychological impact of the fact that there isn't unanimity, and that there are so many different ways in which people are responding, and how do we handle that? Now, we love clarity. We're often much more comfortable when something is clear. There's a situation I sometimes reference when I talk about this, and it could be that some people online, I hope not, have experienced this, but people sometimes when we're counseling who have had some sort of dreaded disease, let's say, and it could be cancer or something like that, and they had, let's say they had the tumor removed, and now they're waiting for test results to see if the cancer had spread or not. And this is a life or death information. This is very important. And it takes a while until the laboratory gets back to you. When they get the results, and even if the results are bad news, and even if the results are somewhat devastating, many people say that is easier than that week or 10 days that they were waiting for the results to come back. Because we're even more at ease with bad news, but clarity than the uncertainty. And I don't have to tell you that this disease is fraught with uncertainty. Even the experts that I referenced earlier will openly admit that they're facing something now that they don't really have a handle on. They're working very hard, and some of the efforts that are being made are heroic, but they're scratching their heads and they're confused. You know, can you get it again? Is there an immunity? Is there not an immunity? Why has it not subsided as the flu does during the summer months? There are a lot of questions that they don't have answers for. So we're dealing with a situation that's not only very dangerous and scary, but one that we don't really understand. And what we do, and part of what human nature is that when dealing with an ambiguous situation, there's even research to support that, we impose on the uncertainty certainty. We will sort of delude ourselves and try to almost make believe like we do know for sure, which is risky and can be dangerous. But that's a lot of what's happening, that people are, because there's no real clarity about what's going on, people are jumping to their own conclusions, people who are not trained necessarily in health and medicine. But again, the void created by the vagueness and the uncertainty is creating this. So we have a situation where there are real schisms in our community, that there are subsets of the Orthodox Jewish community who are continuing to conduct themselves as if nothing changed. And then there are other subsets of the community that are taking very extreme precautions. And that's fine, but what happens when we mingle? What happens when we overlap? What happens if it's even within the same community? What happens when we want to establish a certain level of precaution and our children are going to play with peers or other individuals who don't have that same level of precaution? How do we deal with this? Or how do we deal in general with uncertainty or ambiguity? So the first thing is, and that's a new challenge with this disease, is where are we getting our information? And what news sources are we relying upon? The acquisition of information and the impartment of news has changed radically in recent years with the advent of the internet and social media. It used to be that there were a handful of sources of information, more similar than dissimilar. Today, you can get flooded, literally flooded. There's a deluge of news sources and information sources, and they bombard you, not only, even if you don't want to look for it, they come and they appear on your devices and they sort of assault you. And that also creates anxiety, and many of them have biases, and many of them may not be, also because it's so competitive as to which one of these news media and outlets are going to be getting your attention. they're being very prone to have sensational kind of headlines or report information that may not be verified yet because they want you to read their source. So one of the things you have to do is really have to learn how to navigate this new source of information and this new way in which we gather information. What sources are we going to rely on? Which ones are reliable? How do we filter it? How do we know what information is really accurate and what is just trying to grab our attention? So we got to learn how to ourselves be in the driver's seat vis-a-vis this kind of provision of information. Then we know, at least we'll know what is known and what is not known. And you know, the other thing that we can deal with, and I think this is important because it is very disruptive to be in the midst of something so unclear. And again, we have to resist the temptation to jump to conclusions ourselves as if we know to fill it, to get ourselves out of this ambiguity, is to know that it will be clarified. I think, the only accurate way we can sort of predict the future, I like to quote often the great theologian Yogi Berra, who used to say that predicting is very difficult, especially about the future. But the only way we really can take a stab, his other great quote that I love is that the future ain't what it used to be. But the only way we can know is from precedent, is what has been. And if we look historically, and the old adage that whoever doesn't learn from history is destined to repeat it. If we look at history, other periods when there's been not only pandemics, but other social events that have been disruptive, dangerous, and even harmful, they ultimately resolve. They ultimately reach a resolution. We ultimately get a handle on it. So I think it's safe to say that we will reach a point when we will have a handle on this disease, whether we'll find a cure, a vaccine, or we'll learn somehow to live with it. And I'm not saying that this isn't a game changer. It could very well be. It could very well be that when this is over, or more or less resolved, that our approach to medicine, our approach to healing, our understanding of disease may change, because this illness, this COVID-19, is just not following the rules. It's not similar to disease that we've faced in the past. So it could be, in some respects, a game changer. And there have been other events in history that are game changers as well. The Holocaust and the creation of the State of Israel has changed us as a Jewish nation, changed our understanding of persecution and what the possible resolution is for persecution. The bombing of Hiroshima and the advent of nuclear weapons has changed world policy in very dramatic ways, and just even a simpler way. The advent of the internet has changed every aspect of life. But we're getting used to it, evolving it. We're coming home to it. We're getting familiar with it, and the same thing will happen here. And so, really, what it speaks to is patience. And what it really speaks to is to take our time to understand, to wait, and to understand that this will happen. We'll get to that point when we'll be able to live in a more relaxed way, either by conquering the disease or somehow learning how to live with it. Let me mention to people, remind people that if you have background noise, to please put on your mute, because it is disruptive. Also, that we welcome questions or comments through the chat. That seems to work best, especially we have a fairly large audience here. So please, post any thoughts or questions that you have. You can do it either publicly so everybody sees, or if you want to remain anonymous, you can send it directly either to me or to the host, to Cheryl Chernovsky, who's our host. And by the way, I should thank Cheryl as well for her assistance in organizing this. And if you really don't even want your question or comment read, just mention it in the chat. Okay, now what happens? What happens if you are in a particular community, surrounding neighborhood, where what you believe is right, what your standard is for yourself, and even harder perhaps for your children when you don't have such immediate control? Or what happens when it's not in tandem with your surroundings? What happens if you want more precautions, you want masks even outside, you want to avoid close contact sports for yourself or for your children, and everybody outside is really sort of disregarding that and are resuming life as it had been? How do you handle that? What do you do for yourself, and what do you do for your children? So first of all, if you really are off, if you're really not, if your personal position seems somewhat radical one way or the other, it may pay for you to re-examine, because it's okay, and we'll talk about that if that happens, but you should at least rethink it. maybe go back to some news sources, maybe consult with experts. And thank God we have, even within our community, some really top experts, and try to get a sense if your position you're taking is really fits, it makes sense who you are. And by the way, the differences can be not only just outlook. People have different levels of risk-taking or caution, just in general. If you just, even before this coronavirus happened, we know that some people were willing to take certain risks. Some people were willing maybe to walk alone in marginal neighborhoods, and others may not. Some people will drive a little faster and more recklessly than others, because our level of caution and daredevilness, if you will, does fit in the spectrum. So some people are willing to take more risks. But there's another issue that we could look at it, and that's in terms of what was referred to in psychology literature as what's called the locus of control. Now, the locus of control literature is how much do you follow your own sort of internal barometer, what you believe to be right, what you think is correct, and how much do you accommodate to the norms or the social norms of the area you live in. There are some people who are real iconoclasts. Some of them are very creative and imaginative people. I think the story that often comes to my mind was how Velcro was discovered. Apparently, for people who go hiking in Switzerland, there's a plant. And this plant very easily gets stuck to your clothing. And for hundreds of years, people would hike in the Alps, and they would get this plant stuck to them, and they would pull it off, and they'd curse, and they'd be annoyed. And one guy was once hiking, and this plant got stuck to him, and said, well, the plant can do it, why can't we do it? And he discovered Velcro. I mean, he's, I'm sure, a very wealthy man today. Now, I often think that how many people had this thing stuck to them and never bothered to think, hey, this is something we can do as well. So there are people that are very themselves. They think for themselves. And children too. There are children who, and sometimes these are very difficult children because they're not necessarily terribly obedient, and sometimes they're very creative children. And there are other people who are like very accommodating. So whatever people are doing, they want to do the same. They have a very strong need to sort of belong and adhere and follow what's really conventional. It's the external locus of control. So they're much more focused on the outside. Most of us fall somewhere in between, and that's generally the healthiest place to be. That we have our own opinions, we have a mind of our own. On the other hand, we are also thinking about the community and the broader and other people and what they think and their position. We are by nature social beings. We like to herd, we like to belong. So therefore we should be focused on what other people's positions are. But here, it's distinctly possible that you may have a particular position, and may have a certain standard and you've researched it and you feel it's correct, and the prevailing community, the people around you, or it could be periodic. You could be in your immediate community, they're taking the same precautions you are, and then you're visiting relatives in another community, or you're attending a wedding or a bar mitzvah, and that community has very different standards. What do? Do you bend, or do you stick to your guns? Now, one factor that's important here is that the stakes are pretty high. We're not talking about, imagine you like to wear a tie in Shabbos, and you come to a shul and nobody's wearing a tie. So you decide to take your tie off because you don't want to be different from everybody around you. The consequences aren't huge there. You'll get the spot on your shirt instead of on your tie when you eat. But here we're talking about an illness. In fact, I was speaking to somebody the other day, and I was talking about precautions that I wanted to adhere to. I said, wow, what are you talking about? Nobody's died in weeks or months or whatever. Nobody's died in weeks. It's not just dying. People who've had this disease many of them have lingering side effects or effects. And even those who have come out of it unscathed will tell you that they were 2 months that they're out of commission. This is pretty serious. So, what do you do when there is this difference, and how do you negotiate that first for yourself, and how do you negotiate that for your children? So there's a very nice story that I think is relevant. The story is told about the Stipler. Someone once came to the Stipler and said to him, I have a business, and my business is making $10,000, but there's a guy across the street, and he's making like $20,000. So the Stipler said, don't worry, we'll be okay. So he waited. A few months later, he comes back and says, okay, I'm making $25,000, but the guy across the street's making $50,000. So I said, don't worry, it'll be all right. So finally comes back a few months later, he says, okay, so I'm making $100,000 now. But the guy across the street's making $200,000. Why is he making so much more money than I am? And the Stipler said to him, because he's running one business, you're running two businesses. You're busy with your business and the other person's business. And I think the healthiest approach to this issue, when there is a schism, when there is a difference between your position and somebody else's position, is that you have yours and respect the other person. Don't be busy with what everybody else is doing. And I have learned over the years, I can say even not only just as a psychologist, but for many years being an Orthodox Jew in a work setting where there weren't that many Orthodox Jews. And when I was consistent and when I was clear about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and I didn't preach about it, and I didn't try to make it a very big issue, people respected it. And I think the same thing is here true. Is you be clear about your position. You're not trying to tell somebody else what they can do. And the truth of the matter is, we don't know. It is very unclear. But you state your position that this is what I'm holding. This is the position I'm taking. And I'm not, you may be right. In fact, I have to tell you, I'm one of the people who's a little bit more on the cautious end in terms of many of these factors. And I pray to God every day that I'm wrong, because it worries me about people who are less careful and what seems to me is taking more risks. But as long as we have to respect each other. Harriet mentioned she's in 5 towns. I'm also from the 5 towns. And I have to say that there was a letter that came out from the collective rabbis of the 5 towns when this was first happening. And they listed their poskim. They listed the rabbinic decisors, whom they are following in terms of standards they have. And then they said in the letter, there are other subsets of the community or neighboring communities that have different poskim, different rabbinic decisors, and they're doing something different. And they said, and they're right, and we're right, because we're following our standards and they're following their standards. And that, I think, is a very healthy way, and I think a way that can work very well for us to tolerate and to respect the differences that exist. Again, we're not in a position to say who's right or wrong if there is such a thing. In fact, somebody once put it very well, that people think that unity requires unanimity. And that's not the case. We can be different, can have different outlooks, can have different positions, and you're right and I'm right, but be secure, but feel secure with the position that you're taking. And don't try to impose it on others, and you'll find that people will be very respectful. Obviously, if you're attending a celebration or somebody's Simcha, or if you're in a shul which has certain standards, you have to respect it, even because that's the shul standards. But it, again, socially and informal settings, I think that's the best approach. Now, the other thing is, once you make a decision, this is very important in today's world, again, where there's this where we're drowning in information and inconclusive statements and changing minds, etc. When you've researched it and when you've made your conclusion, then that's it. Stay with it. Don't start constantly obsessing, questioning, and re-questioning. Obviously, you can reconsider. That's normal. I mean, as we get more information, you might think differently, but think it out. But once you've reached a position, if you're hesitant and tentative, then you're sort of inviting yourself and your children, for that matter, to not be firm and conclusive in the position that you're taking. And if you're not sure, then talk it out with someone. Talk it out either with an expert, or even just talk it out with a spouse, a friend, someone who's your rabbi, your rebbe. And talking it out is helpful, and even if the other person doesn't have a conclusion themselves, but it does allow you to reach a conclusion. Also, by the way, when you're judging other people, sometimes you have to be aware that you may not be aware, you may not know what their considerations are. You don't know that they might have someone at home who has some immune deficiency, and that's why they're being so excessively cautious. You may not be aware that even though, let's say, there isn't they're in an age when it wouldn't be terribly consequential, etc. But what it might mean to them if they're out of work for 4 weeks and financially, and that's why they may have to be more careful what the fallout will be, financial fallout. On the other hand, from the other extreme as well, many people have businesses and cannot practice social distancing or wearing masks to that extent to keep their business going, and financially, they just have to. They may have to take those kind of risks just to keep preserve their livelihood. So these are considerations, and so before you jump to conclusions and make judgments, you should factor these matters in as well. I'm going to talk a little bit in terms of children. Somebody actually posted a chat and said children listen more readily than adults. That's somewhat true. You'll find that younger children, let's say pre-adolescent or elementary school age children, and certainly children, even younger children, they're used to adults bossing them around, and they're used to adults telling them to do all sorts of things that don't make a whole lot of sense to them. I mean, it doesn't really make sense why they can't have ice cream as their appetizer for dinner, or why they have to go to a doctor and have needles stuck in their arm. But they're used to adults telling them to do things. And when we say it firmly, and I can even observe with my own grandchildren how very young children have been keeping the distance, etc. And this is part of their lifestyle. Now, it gets a little different with adolescents. Adolescents will challenge, and in a healthy way. I'm not talking about anything like extreme rebellion, but developmentally, you want your adolescent to be questioning and doubting, etc. And so adolescents need an explanation. Adolescents do need to have it more sort of explained to them why we're taking this position, other people are not, or the whole notion that you can have a position, that it's okay, and you're entitled to have your position, and other people have different ones. I wouldn't suggest getting into major battles, especially now with all the other tension that's going on with your teenager, and it's very hard for the teenager, probably harder even than for us, if there are different standards, because the peer world is extremely important to the teen, adaptively. I mean, that's what, again, there is that transition from a focus on the family to the focus on the peer group, which is what you want. That is part of the growth and what we refer to as individuation and separation that takes place during adolescence. So when all the teens are hanging around in enclosed areas and are not observing the kind of social distancing you'd want, that it may be very hard for them to resist. One common mistake that parents make is when the children come to them and say, well, everybody else's parents are letting them. Well, everybody else's parents are letting them because their child told their parents that you're letting them. And as I often say, our children are sitting together during recess plotting to undermine us, and we don't talk to the other parents. And sometimes it's very worthwhile to call the other parent and say, this is what my child is saying, and how do you feel about it? Where is he? Because not, again, without intruding, without trying to impose your own standards, but are you struggling as well? Because if the parents are united and if the message is consistent, then even teenagers will be more adaptive and will accept it. But as I said, with teenagers, they need the explanation. They need the reason why we're doing all this. Let me just conclude that, one of the themes that's been developed by myself and others, and is that one of the ways to tolerate with the difficult times we're living in now is to try to cull lessons, to try to see where we can grow, and we will. There's a lot we can learn from what we've been through, and I know I have, and I know many other people have. And I'm not going to say that we understand why God did this. We're not that wise, but once it's done, it doesn't hurt as much if we can grow from it. And so maybe one of the lessons we have to learn is how to have more respect for those who differ, not to be so judgmental. We've grown so much, particularly as an Orthodox Jewish community, that we have so many different subsets, and each one is competing for who's God's favorite. And indeed, I think it's we can learn that we can respect each other and we can be different. And even in this area, we have different outlooks and different tolerance or different amount of, how should I put it, let's say belief in what the established media is communicating, and to work on ourselves to be more tolerant and to be more accepting, and also to feel confident that if we have a particular position, we've given due consideration to the prevailing approach of, let's say, our particular community, that we can be different if it makes sense to us. Let me reiterate, as Harriet had, that first of all, we hope this has been helpful, and that also I can speak on behalf of the trauma team. We spoke part of geriatric unit. The Ohel is kind of a very large organization servicing many different of the challenges that we face. But we're available, and please feel free to contact us through our website if you have more individual issues or considerations or anything that we haven't addressed. Seems to me that nobody has submitted any questions on the chat. We have about a minute or two left, I think. Let me just look at the time. We have 3 minutes. If anybody wants to either just unmute themselves and ask a question, or just submit a comment or a question in the chat, we'd be happy to address it.
Norman, somebody sent in a private question. If I can just try to respond, and if it's not responded enough, just say need more information. Someone wanted to know How do they deal with their parents and going to a bar mitzvah for their great-grandchild, their first great-grandchild, which of course is Kanai such a great sense of nachas and a mazel tov and a simcha. And so again, as Norman said earlier, we're not doctors, so we can't really like paskin from a medical perspective. Though I would say the first thing you have to do is, of course, ask their family physician, is this even something that you can even think about? But if the doctor said that they think you might be able to, it's back to what I kind of was saying, is look at the risk, evaluate the risks and the benefits. You might want to say maybe the grandparents, and again, let's say the doctors say it's something to think about. You might want to think about, how can I mitigate the risk by possibly having the grandparents just come for a piece of laning or for the laning part, kind of keeping them distant, away. Do you want to make let's say it's a summer bar mitzvah, maybe you do need to make an outside. I'm not here to discuss the politics of outdoor minyanim versus indoor and street minyanim, but maybe that's something you want to think about, a way to both mitigate the risk but share in the simcha. And if that's not possible, then you can always have a trial. You know, that's why we have Monday and Thursday, so that if you don't make it for Shabbos, maybe see your child lane on a day when you can drive in, when there can be less people. Again, you have to get back to what's the point, what will work, and come up with a way to really enjoy the simcha, but enjoy the simcha with health, and as Norman said, and once you guys have made your decision, live with it. Because you don't want, because if you ruminate over and over and over again, that's all you're going to be thinking of, and then you forget really what this is really all about. So if I didn't answer the question, someone can contact Cheryl. That's how it came to me, but I do have your email, and I'll say, did I answer it enough? And if you need more, please, I'll try. Any other questions, comments?
Another question that came in is, should the very elderly have haircuts in the back? Is it okay for them to have haircuts in their backyard and go to doctor visits? So I think we had said that we can't answer that.
I think that again, that really, and again, that's part of the communication that I said, talking. You really do have to talk to the person's doctor. Is this something they can have? Because the doctor themselves is going to know that person's medical history. Do they have any kind of autoimmune deficiencies that I don't know about, that you don't know about, that they might not even know about? And again, you go back to who's the person, who's the hair cutter. Again, we need to figure out, for some people, I can speak. I was talking to my mother-in-law who just had a haircut, and it was as if you gave her gold. She was so excited to feel, like she said, a mensch again, to feel taken care of. It was something we evaluated. Was this something good for her? But again, I really would defer to the doctor, communicate, and find out why is the haircut in the backyard so important? What is it that it really means? Is it really just getting your hair clipped? Or is it the way you look, your self-esteem? What kind of a person was this? If this is someone, it's not me, that never left their house without a full face of makeup and everything in place, you're going to have a different response. It's getting to know the person, getting to know the environment, and getting to evaluate the risk. That really becomes the bottom line, and that's really the answer. In terms of going to the doctor, at this point in time, if you need a doctor, or if you have a regular scheduled visit, I really think that unless the doctor will tell you, please don't come because it's not safe for you, people need to start going back to their doctors. I see for myself, most doctors' offices are very secure, they're very safe, and we don't want, God forbid, something to happen to someone because we were afraid to be checked. That's not our point. Our point is to be well, to enjoy, to not just hear people like us talk at night, but to enjoy family and friends.
I think there was another question, but it's going to be, I'm going to get the email and I'll just, whoever send in that other question, I'll address it later. What do we do? Have to end now. It's 10 o'clock. I hope this has been helpful. And again, please feel free to contact us if we can give you further assistance.